Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando and I Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando and I, and with me, as always, is the early morning breath of fresh air. That is Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say hi.
Hi, everybody. Good morning.
Really excited for this episode. I know we have a very special guest. Jennifer, would you do the honors?
I'd be happy to. Yes, today we are speaking with John Crossman. He is the founder and president of CrossMarc Services, a real estate brokerage and advisory firm out of Winter Park, Florida. For those of you who aren't familiar with Florida, that's kind of between Orlando and Tampa. And he's got a wealth of experience in commercial real estate. He also has more than just one company. He has two companies, two podcasts, two kids, right?
Yeah,
two of everything.
Yeah. Two chairs. I just
there you go. So it fits in perfectly with Between Two Chairs. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, each of your companies, each of your kids, if you want to. What makes John Crossman tick?
Sure. I want to start with, Simon Sinek has, really great TED Talk where he talks about why, why are people doing what they're doing? And sometimes you talk to business people and the why is they'll say, well, to make money. And he says, that's not the right answer. That's the byproduct. That's what comes out. So the why. So I always like to explain to people that my why goes back to my dad. My dad was a pastor and civil rights leader, did a lot of work in Fort Lauderdale. He actually did some affordable housing down there. That's still there today, which is really cool. And in 1970, he was given the nickname the Bridge Builder for his work in the civil rights movement. And so about 8 years ago, a group of Republicans and Democrats working together, which can happen, named an actual bridge after my dad, and it's in Winter Park. So you can Google Reverend Ken Crossman Bridge. There's a real bridge named after my dad. So when you know that about my background, that I grew up in a household that was very community-minded, and I'm so thankful for Fernando being a leader. I appreciate leaders because I grew up in a household seeing that kind of component. The other side is we did not have a lot of money. I used to say that I was poor. My mom, she's 86 and she watches everything I do, and she'll say, "Stop saying that, John. We live by faith." I'm like, okay, And so what I always like to say is that kind of created in me. I became a devout capitalist at a young age. It's like I wanted to go out and work hard and make money, and not trying to have nice things as much as I really wanted to, have just a better life for me and now, my family, things like that. At the same time, I never really left that environment, and having a real compassion and heart for community and people that are, marginalized or don't have a voice or maybe don't have the opportunity. There's some neighborhoods I grew up in and I got out and some didn't. And what is that? How can we help with that? So today, with CrossMarc, the main goal with CrossMarc is we're buying properties, we're buying shopping centers. It's kind of the main thing, and then we operate them. And then I do consulting work within that space with that company. I have a partnership with Dr. Josh Harris, who is a Fordham University real estate professor. And so we do consulting for major corporations, family offices. We can help them with economic studies. We can do expert witness work. We do outsource marketing. And so the balance of that and then buying things on our accord. Crossman Career Builders goes back to that connection point to my dad, which is in that company. It's a for-profit company. We do some paid public speaking and work there. And we have the two podcasts and have a book. It's really about impacting community. The consulting work I do with that company, I always say it's like, how do you prevent your CEO from being at a Coldplay concert and end up on a Jumbotron? That's the kind of consulting we do in there. And then through the revenues with that, we have 12 endowed scholarships at 7 universities. And most of those scholarships are diversity focused. And if you don't mind me saying this, I I was focused on DEI before DEI. I was focused on it during DEI, and now it's more a post-DEI world. I've never changed. I was talking to people the other day. I'm like, hey, how about this? Can we just really work at the best talent in our industry? Let's do that. I will agree with that. And then secondly, people who are not aware of our industry that would benefit from being aware of our industry, let's do that. So that's what I'm trying to do, So those two companies connect together in my mind really well, and the different things I'm doing, and then working to make impact. And since you asked, my oldest daughter is a senior at Palm Beach Atlantic University in downtown West Palm, and I'm a big fan of West Palm Beach. It's a great area, great downtown. And then my younger daughter is a junior at Southeastern University in Lakeland, where she has had great mentorship from our friends at Publix. They have been wonderful in helping encourage her. And she is a social work major, and she's leading here in a couple of weeks the suicide prevention walk for Polk County. She recently received a proclamation from the mayor of Bartow. So they both have been very supportive of the work I do in different ways, continue that on.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like they're following in their dad's footsteps, and kudos to you, because I think raising children who are leaders is probably one of our most important goals as parents, and probably one of the hardest things to do when their attentions are drawn in so many different directions. So thank you for all of your leadership and your service, and for being so consistent in your messaging and your leading and your educating to reach out to everybody, and to your point, to those that need to be most aware, or to those who are the most capable that may not be aware. So thank you. And then I love that you started with the why, because one of my favorite episodes from your podcast, The Crossman Connection, was the most recent conversation that you had with Solomon Timothy. And that whole title was Lead with Purpose by Knowing Your Why. So Fernando and I always talk about that, and I've had a ton of discussions with people about how why is my favorite question. So thank you for starting with that. You gave a presentation at ICSC at Florida Realtors. I saw you at ICSC as well, but at Florida.
Yeah, that's right. We were both together.
They overlapped. But you gave a presentation in front of the Commercial Alliance all about retail, and you threw out some numbers that I would love for you to go over if that's okay.
Sure.
And the numbers were 210, 1,000, 5, and 1880. I'm not sure about the last one, but are you game to go through those?
Okay, I didn't realize math was involved.
No math. It was the 210 in regards to retail.
I got you.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, let me start with this, that one of the things that makes retail challenging is retail gets false pressure. A lot of times the average person sort of thinks they understand retail because they live it, right? And in some ways they do have good context. But what can happen in retail real estate is the false pressure. Pressure gets pushed on a retail development that really shouldn't happen. And an example would be if a developer is building a residential development, or the city is looking for revitalization, and they'll say things like, let's just get Apple Store to come in here. Let's get IKEA to come in here. Let's push Publix to come in here. And if the demographics don't work, they don't work. You have to focus on, job creation. You got to focus on housing, and then retail comes in response to that. So when we talk about Publix, and this is true for pretty much most grocery stores, but specifically Publix, if you said to yourself, gosh, that right there, that area, that piece of land would be a great Publix location, the math is that for Publix to go there, they need to have 10,000 people within a 2-mile radius when they open that are not currently being served. Okay, so if you have a site, you're like, gosh, this is a good grocery site. Well, you map out where all the grocery stores are, circle that 2-mile demographic, where is it trending, and really completely understand that. And that tells you the story. Okay. And it's interesting because I do a long presentation on the history of shopping centers, and I always go back since the dawn of man. People tend to live their lives within about a 2-mile radius. Now, you could also track that differently. Maybe it's 15 minutes or it's 30 minutes or things like that. And you guys, might say, well, gosh, John, in Miami, there's Publixes across the street from each other. That's not. But what you come back to is the number of people in the area, right? So if there's a rural area and there's 10,000 people 5 miles, or there's 10,000 people in a block, so you can stretch or contract, right? But I'm just taking that basic rule of thumb as the 2 mile, right? So I just always think about, when you're thinking about retail, really try to dive into that. And again, then where it's going to be, like where is the housing going? And then you can track into that. So that's just a core number. So, if somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, I think this is a great public site. Well, how many people in 2 mile radius? Well, 5. Okay, that's not going to work, right? So, but there can be a story behind it. You could say, well, we have 1,000 houses being built, and they're going to be an average of 3 people per, you can start running that math, okay? But that core is really key. The next thing is that when you want to ask yourself, how's retail doing in Florida? The 2 questions to really ask yourself is, are people moving here? Are people vacationing here, right? Like if you get a yes and a yes, it's probably good, and what's happening, what's driving that. Now, I hear these stats from different people, and it's like, there's 1,000 people a week moving to South Florida, wherever it might be. And so if that's true, then you just do quick math. You're like, well, John, does that mean we need a new Publix every 10 weeks? Yeah, yes, it does, to meet demand. But that also means you need a new nail salon every 10 weeks. You need maybe several. You need a new hair salon. You need a new dentist. You need a new, it kind of keeps rolling with that. So demographically understanding that math and tracking that math. And so I heard somebody the other day, and they said there's 1,500 people a week moving to Central Florida. Now, again, I would want to understand, where's that data coming from? Is it accurate? But if it's accurate, we need a new Publix every 7 to 8 weeks in Central Florida opening to keep up with demand. And that doesn't even include tourists. And so to talk about tourists real quick, tourists spend 5 times as much as an average consumer, right? So when you have high tourist areas, it can really blow those numbers up. I did an interview with the Wall Street Journal several years ago, and they called me and they had done this ratio of retail per person, and their worst over retail markets in America were San Francisco, Atlanta, and Orlando. And so he was telling me the numbers, and I said, well, hang on a second. I'm like, what demographic, what number are you using for population? He told me, and I said, well, you need to add about 500,000. And he said, why? And I said, well, we have tourists in Orlando, right? He could not get it. I did 2 interviews with him, and I kept saying, your formula is off. You have to add in an impact for the tourists, rerun the numbers, and then we drop way down. They ran the article. They kept Orlando number 3, and they just left out all my comments. They just couldn't get it. They just could not. It just
wrap
was,
their head around that fact.
Wrap their head around it. And then, of course, by the way, there's tourists, and then there's conventioneers, and that's a different kind of tourist, right? And then one of my favorite things I always talk about is let's just pick on Fernando. Fernando, how many bottles of ketchup do you think your household might go through in a year? Just what number do you think?
I'm going to say about 3 big bottles of ketchup.
3, okay. That's
mine less than 1.
Okay,
Mine's
so
probably 1 every 2 years.
My girls love ketchup.
Let's go with 3. Yeah, so let's go with 3. So if you and your spouse are on vacation and you go to a Ritz-Carlton for an Amelia Island for a weekend, are you going to buy a bottle of ketchup? No. But if you and your wife, and again, I don't know, but you and your 3 kids go to Panama City and you get a nice place on the beach and you're going to stay there a week, are you going to buy a bottle of ketchup? And the answer is probably yes, right? So if we have an apartment unit next to a timeshare unit, and the apartment unit's consuming 3 bottles of ketchup a year, and this one's consuming 52, right? The math is it's explosive. It's crazy. I actually sold a shopping center years ago, right at the entrance of Disney, and the demographic said there was 8 people living in, within 2 miles or something. But I created my own mathematical formula, and I did the number of hotel rooms times average occupancy, average number of people per unit, times 80% occupancy, blah, blah, blah. And I ran the math, and I showed there was an equivalent of 400,000 people in that area, then at times 5. And we sold that property, it was a record number at the time. But again, we had to tell that story so they understood it, right? Did I hit all that on the math? Did I hit all the numbers?
Yes, you hit on all of them except for 1880, which I'm not sure if I got this number correct. Did I? I get some.
No, you got it right. You got it right.
Okay.
So when I talk about retail today, what I do is always take like Since the Dawn of Man and walk through. And then what I like to stop on is the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And you guys know that film. When you watch that film this holiday season, I really want you to follow it and notice how much walking they do, right? Remember they go to the dance and they're walking back and they see the old house, they throw the rock, and he does the last one on the moon, And then he goes to his local bar. He sees his friends. He goes to his work. In the end, he bangs on old man Potter. And old man Potter, he's like yelling at him. Well, think about that. Like, was he running 26 miles? How much was he running? Right? Like, then think about that math. I told you about 2 miles. Like his scale of his work, his home, right? His place where he went and saw his friends was all walkable. Okay. Now note that It's a Wonderful Life came out in 1946. So that is what America looked like, was all lots of kind of small communities. That's how it worked. The highway system, all the interstate highway system came in after that. Why did the highway system come in? For fear that we need to move troops across the country, right? So we have these highway systems go this way across the country, and that creates it. What happened after that? Well, then we have the explosion of McDonald's and fast food and hotels. Like that changed everything. And then we go into the creation of the regional mall. Now, remember I talked about 2 miles. When I entered the industry, the first thing you would do when you were a retail guy and you would enter a market, like if you said, okay, we're going to go look at Naples, we're going to go look at Jacksonville, you would plot on the map all the existing malls first, and you would do 10-mile rings around all of them. Now, notice what I just said. That violates what I said earlier about 2 mile, right? So people say, John, why did malls eventually fail? Well, many of them. Well, again, they're violating that thing, right? So malls became town centers. They were literally places for people to gather in community and be together. And that was awesome. I'm an 80s kid. I always say I'm hungry like the wolf. See what percentage of the audience gets that. By the way, we had Prince, we had Bruce Springsteen, Michael Jackson. Yes. Unbeatable. No one can compete with us. We got this down. But that was that era. Now, what happened, though, is that malls became very consistent, and there's value in retail through consistency. I always say this, like, if we were on a business trip together, we're someplace where, I don't know, we're in Indonesia, I don't know, and there's a McDonald's there, and we're like, oh, let's just get a cheeseburger, right? We know what it's going to taste like, right? Consistency matters. But is it the best? Is it the best quality? Does McDonald's make the best cheeseburger? No. My brother-in-law makes the best cheeseburger, I promise you, right? On his grill. And so consistency has value, but it can dilute quality. So malls became very consistent, but they became kind of soulless. And I actually can do a deep dive on this with more examples. But the point being is that malls started to go down. What started to ramp up in the 90s, the most consistent retailer that was successful was Super Walmart. Super Walmart coming up around America. And of course, Super Walmarts were known for devastating their downtowns. I actually was in Bentonville not that long ago. My wife had a family reunion in the area. And Sam Walton's museum is very popular right in downtown Bentonville. And it's kind of ironic because it's going to be killed tons of downtowns. We'll deal with that later. But anyway, then we get past that, and then we move into this era where town centers become very popular. It's kind of this return to downtown. Now, as I keep going, you guys ever watch the show Better Call Saul? Better Call Saul, yeah. Fernando, where was his office? You remember?
In a strip center.
You got it, right? So if you remember back in the 80s, we had LA Law, right? And like law firms are these big, powerful, whatever. And then here comes this show, Better Call Saul, and he's kind of a slimy attorney, and he's in a strip shopping center, right? But I look at that and I'm like, yeah, you know what? That actually makes more sense. Post World War II, we started saying retail goes here, office goes here, industrial goes here. And in reality, people don't shop like that. And so then we started doing town centers. We're trying to get back to It's a Wonderful Life. The reality is like what's working moving forward. It's not so much mixed use. It's mixed uses, not in like an apartment here, this here, but the uses within redevelopments. We're doing a project right now as a consultant about putting more multifamily in malls, vacant boxes, right? Mixing the uses in them together. All that to say is that I have said that the future retail is going to be like the 80s, not the 1980s, the 1880s. That's where that comes from.
See, I got that right.
You did.
Yeah, you did get it right. And the thing about so the thing about it is that when you think about being in a small town, you need to have all your different things accessible, right? And like when I was a kid, my mom would take me to the dentist, and it was usually in an office tower, and they had those terrible highlights magazines. It's awful, right? Well, now my dentist is, in a shopping area. It's great in and out. I love going to see my dentist. It's a much more pleasurable experience, right? I think back in the day, dentists we're professionals. This is a profession. We're in a building. Whereas they realize now, like, no, you need to be consumer friendly, right? So if mom is dropping the kid off the dentist, mom can go do some grocery shopping and pick the kid up, right? And so look, if your law firm was in a shopping center, is that terrible? No, not necessarily. I mean, like if it's accessible, I live in a nice neighborhood, and right in our downtown, our retail area, there's a law firm there. That's okay. So that mixing of uses, I think we've got to be a little bit more thoughtful about moving forward. I will say that when I got into this business in the early 90s, there were mall people and there were like open air shopping center people, and I was an open air shopping center guy. The mall guys didn't talk to me. Like I'd go to ICSC in Vegas. I'm not kidding you. They were in suits. I mean, nice, expensive stuff. And I had not as nice a suit. They had like Armani, and I was Joseph Banks or whatever. And they were like, no, I'm a mall guy. I'm mall, whatever. And actually at one point, ICSC they started the open air shopping center conference, which they still have. And that was sort of birthed out of this other thing because the mall guys, were doing their thing, right? It was a different culture, right? But I think that being mindful, like, and in that time, if you called Macy's and said, hey, there's a vacant space next to you, we're going to put in a doctor's office or an office tenant, they'd flip out. And like, I remember in the early 2000s, we had to redo a lot of restrictions. But I remember calling Target and saying, hey, we got this space next to you, we want to put an office use, not retail. And they were delightful to work with. So again, we started thinking what should be close by. Well, what should be close by is like what's creating traffic and energy. And by the way, there are going to be malls. There are successful malls across America. Not all malls are bad. There are a lot of malls that are doing great, right? I mean, the top 300 are doing awesome, and they'll continue to do so. They just got to make sure they're staying connected. They got to make sure they're staying connected and relevant. If I owned a mall anywhere in America right now, I would partner with the local high school and say, anytime your kids want to perform, they can do it for free. I would partner with the local churches and saying, if your choir wants to come in and sing around the Christmas tree, come on. And by the way, someone like, oh, that's not politically correct. Invite every church, and then you can vote on which one had the best choir. Have a church sing-off. I don't care, right? But do that to kind of bring people in. And by the way, if you're in retail in Florida and you're like, John, who is doing it right? Who is doing it? You want to see it? I'll give you a couple examples. Number one, you got to go to the villages. The villages town centers are the best town centers in our state. I could do a whole thesis on this. No one is doing it better than them. They understand their demographic. They're appealing. They're open to the public. They're consistent. I mean, on and on. Got to check them out. I would throw in there Disney Springs as one of my favorite experiences. By the way, if you go to Disney Springs, notice how easy it is to park and how hard it is to try to whip around. And you might think, well, what's that all about? Teenage boys in cars. Like that's a thing that sometimes teenage boys will they drive around there. Well, when you go to Disney Springs, if you're just going to go there and park and have a good time, you're going to be awesome. If you try to troll, it ain't going to work. So to me, it's like when you're trying to really understand this business, it's like, I could keep going here, but like learning from the people who are doing it great. And I'll give a quick example. My daughters are adults now, but when they were 4 and 5, I used to like to take them out, do things on the weekend. And I called my wife and I said, what do I do if they need to use the bathroom? And my wife said, well, take them to Publix. I was like, Publix has bathrooms? I didn't know that. Well, they have very nice bathrooms and they're clean and they're safe. Okay. Take this to another level. I was actually speaking at a conference last week and I said to the men in the audience, have you ever been in a parking lot of a grocery store and started to walk in and thought, I might get sexually assaulted? You ever thought that? Probably not. I said, but ask every woman in this audience if they think about that. So Publix taking lighting seriously, clean and safe bathrooms seriously. We were on vacation in South Dakota. We were at a grocery store. One of my daughters needed to use the bathroom, and it was in the loading dock. So I put her in there, and I stood by the door. That's old school, right? That's old school, right? And so Publix location of bathrooms. And the last thing on the subject is, if you want to live a longer life, go through Don't do self-checkout. Go through and see the cashier and make eye contact with them. Studies shown over and over again, more eye contact we have during the day, we live longer, healthier lives. We're meant to be in relationship. Our eye contact. I have a Great Dane, and boy, she look you right in the eye. Just let you know she loves you, right? Well, there's a humanity to that. And so I was actually with Publix executives a couple weeks ago, and I told them, I said, I'm doing a speech, and part of it's going to be shopping at Publix helps you live longer. I've done a presentation that said living in the villages helps you live longer. Now that could be true with other neighborhoods and other retailers, but it's what are they doing to make that human connectivity? That's the reality of having great retail.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you about your thesis about mental health and how, retail really can assist in that. And, Jennifer and I listened to a presentation by Paco Underhill, who speaks, and has written books on consumer behavior. And it's really interesting because he brought a lot of examples of shopping centers and malls in the Asian markets and how intent they are in making sure that the female consumer feels very comfortable. And they have a dedicated parking right at the beginning that has nothing to do with being handicap capable or anything like that, but it's for women, right? It's for them to feel safer to go shopping. So can you speak a little bit more about your thesis on how retail can assist with mental health? And I think part of that question really is related to when the pandemic was happening. There was a lot of conversation about consumer behavior shifting and changing, and maybe changing forever. And perhaps that really didn't pan out the way that people, thought it would. So we'd love your thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah. I could talk about this a lot. It's a big subject. Well, so let's go back in time. So pre-pandemic, you had the retail apocalypse. You had a bunch of national retailers that were going down. You had Amazon surging. And I actually, somebody in my mom's church walked up to her and was like, I'm so sorry your son's going to lose his job. Can you imagine saying that? Why would you say that to my mom at church? But that was this prevailing theory that like somehow every consumer is going to sit in their house and they're going to order everything online from Amazon. They're going to do yoga. They're going to eat kale. By the way, where did kale come from? I don't remember kale as a child. Like we're inventing terrible vegetables. I don't know how this works.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. So, that consumer doing that activity, and you can see how that's kind of logical. You're like, I just get everything from Amazon. I get everything from Amazon. But what if there's another person and they're a little overweight? They hate some Five Guys, and that's on the rotation, right? But they get out of their house and they have friends, and they have people that they go and they meet with. I have a friend every Saturday morning. We walk my dog together, and we solve the world's problems, right? We just talk about kind of nothing, I guess. But like that has been proven over and over again that Group B outlives Group A. And so when we were going into the pandemic, there was this whole thing with retailers downsizing, trying to like make their boxes smaller. And of course, what was funny is then the pandemic hits, they actually needed more space because they need to have more space for people to move around and changing clothes and things like that. And I think that what people realized through that process is that, man, there's a humanity factor. We are pack animals, and you can say that that's by our creation or by our evolution, whatever your belief system is. You cannot deny that. It's like they've done the studies with elephants. Elephants are pack animals. There's a really cool story about this elephant and dog that became best friends. You look it up. It's like, make you cry. It's a cool story. But like dogs and elephants are made to be in relationship together. We're made to be in relationship with each other. One of my things I would say is like, if you have young children or you have a dog, what you know is you have to get them out of your house every day or they will destroy your home. And it's almost like dogs and smart children are more in touch with the reality of what we need, right? Like I'm at home right now and work out of the house a few days a week, and my dog will bother me, and I'll let her in the yard, and she'll just lie in the sun sometimes. Like she just, she knows what her body needs. There's a difference between walking and playing, and play matters too, right? And so to me, it's like getting back to that connectivity of what we really need. And look, I do a lot of work with suicide prevention, and in that space, there's an epidemic of loneliness, right? And we could go into all like a lot of that stuff, whether it's video games or pornography. but there's social media, that space of people being, and I don't mean to be a hater on it because there's a lot of great things about it. Like my Aunt Sandy lives in Indianapolis, and boy, she gets to be really connected to me and my kids' lives through Facebook. That's awesome. There's a beauty to it that's really important. But if you dive way too in that and you miss the human connectivity, you can have real problems, right? And so we have to be in a better space where we're connected to each other for our own mental health, and retail can play a vital role by creating that connectivity. Let me tell you a couple stories. My favorite restaurant is Sato Sushi in Baldwin Park. I have absolutely eaten there more than 500 times in my life, every birthday, every Father's Day for the last 20 years. Well, during the pandemic, it was really bad, right? Because they're, sushi place and all the different things. So they had limited hours, but one of the things they started doing was they sold these big bags of soup, which is cool. You could go buy big. It was meaty soup. They just were using their agreements. They're good chefs. And then they were selling toilet paper and cleaning supplies, right? And so they were doing that because they had a ton of it, right? Didn't need it as much. And then there was a shortage of it, right? Well, here's the funny part to me is by them selling that, it was a violation of Publix's lease, right? They're in a public shopping center. So, they're not supposed to be selling. It was a violation of their own lease and Publix's lease, okay? Now, who enforced that? Nobody. Publix, no problem, right? Ownership, no problem. And so to me, it's like, I couldn't love Publix and Sato more, but I love them more, right? And of course, there's a humanity factor of people getting on their house. Like, what if both those companies said, no, we're not going to violate those leases? What would have happened? And I very clearly remember like, oh my gosh, I'm out of my house and I'm buying something and I'm seeing somebody. There's a humanity to that, right? I'm a creature of habit and I'm very relational. And so I go to like the same convenience store a couple times a week. And so I go in there multiple times and there's a guy in there and he goes by the name Gunny, which is a military thing. And Gunny and I became very close because I'd see him and his birthday, I brought him a gift. And one time I went in there after a run and he's like, hey, Crossman, I can't sell anything. The power's out. The cash order can't work. And I was like, it's not a problem. And so I just gave him a 20 and I got my drink and whatever I got, a power bar, and I left. I came in like a week later and that money might as well have been in Fort Knox, man. Like he had it in an envelope and taped with my exact change, a receipt. He saw me. One time I went in there and I was under a lot of stress and it was really crowded in there that day. And I was feeling a little faint. I kind of paused, kind of held me there. So I was just feeling a little bit off. And I looked up and he was hard staring me down. He was hard. I got to the point where I'm like, man, I wish somebody would try to rob this place while I'm in here because I don't know what Gunny would do. So one day I walk in, there's a woman there, and I said, where's Gunny? And she goes, oh, he died. What? Died. So the next couple of weeks, every time I came in, I said, what about his funeral? Couldn't find anything out. So I did a bunch of research. Gunny was one of 152 residents of Orange County that passed away, and no one got his body. Nobody. So I did. And then I contacted the military cemetery out there near Bushnell, and we got him buried there. He is buried there in Bushnell. Now, what's fascinating is that they contacted me and they said, we're having a service for veterans who were unclaimed. And so I went to it, and they had different groups waving flags. They had some women that sang. There were 17 veterans honored that day. I was the only person. I was the only one that showed up. So at the end of the service, if you've been to a military funeral, they take the flag and they fold it up and they gave it to me, which was a huge honor, but I didn't feel good about it. And so I was, whatever. So I put it in a shadow box, just like the one you have behind you, put it in a shadow box. And a friend of mine who's a Vietnam veteran, we went to the Merritt Island Military Museum there, and Gunny's flag is on display there in recognition of all military people who weren't claimed, right? And so I tell that story to say is like, Gunny's a part of me, right? Like that's part of my humanity, right? And it's part of my relationship with him. And we can carry that. So these little human connection points that we can have, right? And what that can mean long term, it's a vital, important part of our life. And I think a lot of people are stories. I go to the bank sometimes on Saturday, me and all the other old guys, right? But I can tell that they're lonely and they making that eye contact. Or I'll tell you another one is hospitals. I do some work with Advent Health, and they have this great story where they had an area where these elderly people kept calling 911 that didn't really need to be. So they started calling them in advance. Hey, Beatrice, how are you feeling today? They were calling them. They stopped calling 911, and then those would get reserved for emergencies. But they were lonely. That's what was happening, right? Getting in front of that, making that connectivity. So, I think that there are certain things about our humanness that we all need to recognize, and a failure to acknowledge it, like where do school shooters come from? Like where do these different tragedies come from? And the other thing I'll tell you, I was thinking a lot about this morning is one of my biggest advice to people is, of course, it's good to be aware of national and international news, of course. Don't keep your head in that space. Keep your head in a space you can impact, okay? If you think they should be doing something, make it you, right? If you get really like, man, there's people that don't have enough food and they're worried about, food insecurity, dude, go to your pantry, get some stuff out, go to your local place that helps that, donate it, and then ask them how you can volunteer. Like lean in, right? That's what I go back to. When I got involved in commercial real estate, we had a lot of diversity. We had old white guys and we had middle-aged white guys. So we had both, right? We had two, right? And so I wanted to be like, well, let's do something about that. So we created the first scholarship ever in real estate at Florida A&M University, Bethune-Cookman University, Jackson State University. I had a friend of mine in Orlando, it's a tough lady, she's Cuban. She got in my face one time. She's like, you don't do anything for Hispanics. Well, okay. It's like, calm down, Well, Valencia College has a AA program for people getting into multifamily property management. It's predominantly Hispanic women, probably. So I created a scholarship there for Hispanic women. And what I'm working to do is expose them to the rest of commercial real estate, right? So it's not crazy money. Like it's not a huge amount. And sometimes I start it and I'll raise money. But like to me, it's like stay in your headspace. Like if God puts it on your heart, you're like, I care about blank. Turn off the TV and actually do something in your community. And I'll tell you this, people say all the time they love something until you ask them to write a check, and it turns out they like it. And I don't want to hear it. I mean, no. To me, it's like if somebody says, hey, John, let's get together and both write checks, I'm interested. But somebody just giving their opinion, sometimes people think, I tweet, therefore I am. Like somehow I support blank has currency. It doesn't have currency. Currency has currency. Yeah. And this is where retailers, commercial real estate, business leaders, we can reshape society, right? But it's because we have economic resources, we have flexibility of time, and if we stay focused on the right thing, make the big thing, we can make impact.
Absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned, and I've heard you speak before about how important it is for an operator of a shopping center to really understand the financials of the businesses that are within the shopping center, and you always encourage that even if it's not a percentage lease, that you want to know how they're doing, basically the health of the business.
Right.
And I'm wondering, because one of the things that you mentioned is about going to the store and seeing people eye to eye, but I'm seeing a lot of Instacart shoppers. I'm seeing, obviously, there is, Uber Eats and Grubhub and, DoorDash. I'm wondering how, when you're looking at those financials and you're looking at what percentage of their business is now these type of shoppers, how do you view how that's going to change their requirement for square footage in the shopping center, or any insights you'd like to share about that? No,
listen, it's a great question. Let me start big picture, right?
Yeah.
Retail is about sales. It's about sales, about volume, right? Like when I was a young leasing agent and I was talking to a tenant, and a tenant would call me about a space, there's two questions I always love to ask them. My first question always was, what's your first year projected sales? Anybody that knows what they're doing is going to have an answer to that. Second question is, what is the total amount on your budget to spend to fully furnish and fixture your store? Okay. If they say, I don't know, you don't want to lease them that space, right? But if they're a Fortune 500 company or they're a mom and pop nail salon and they know that, right? Like that's the first tell. And, when you're doing retail, this is a generalized rule of thumb. So it can vary per the user, but about 10% of gross sales should be what the rent is on average, right? So if somebody says, I'm going to do $1 million in sales, like their rent they can afford is probably around 100 grand. Now, if you're a gym, you could pay a higher percentage because you don't have a cost of goods, right? And some businesses are lower margin, higher margin. It depends. The grocery business is a very low margin business, so that doesn't work for grocers, but it can work for any number of different uses. So understanding just like if you go to the doctor and they take your blood pressure and your temperature and your pulse and all this kind of thing, the signs of a healthy body, there's signs of a healthy retailer, and that first it starts with sales, right? And so if a shopping center is charging $80 a square foot, and then the tenant's thinks I can't do 800 a square foot in sales, you can't afford it, or you can't, right? And by the way, sometimes when a business goes out, the number one thing people say is, "Oh, the landlord was charging too much rent." Well, it's really unpopular to say, well, my employees want too much money, which that's the biggest cost. Or I can't buy cheaper meat, which is the other biggest cost, right? It's your staff and your cost of your product is the most important thing. So to me, it's really understanding that and understanding what's helping create the most volume. Back to the villages, I just love this one. So, they do golf carts there, right? So I want you to visualize 4 parking spaces. So there's 4 parking spaces, 4 cars come in. If there's 2 people per car, that's 8 people, right? Math, 8 people. But if you have 4 parking spaces, how many golf carts can that hold? The answer is 16, right? And so actually you got 32 people coming in, which could be, 8 or however you did that math. So they increased volume in their retailers in part because of the ability to park more golf carts as opposed to cars. Smart, right? It's smart. So I think the thing about it is when I think about Instacart and things like that, I think the great retailers, well, my friend Joe Brady, who's an author, he wrote a book called Workshop. He said the future retail is going to be haves and have-nots, and it's really defined by technology. And he's not meaning big or small. He's like, hey, it could be a food truck operator that really has a great app that's user-friendly. On the other hand, it could be a big Fortune 500 company, but they're leveraging that technology. And so when you're saying that, it's like when you go into Publix, if you're an Instacart person and you're able to grab your stuff quickly and move quickly, that's a value. But if you're an older person and you want to go really slow and you want to have that experience, you can have that too. I'll say it this way. We used to say omni-channel, right? Where there's multiple ways to connect. I can't think of the guy's name, and I first heard him say this, but he said the future is harmony, which means it's if my 20-year-old daughter is having a shopping experience and my 86-year-old mother is having a shopping experience, are they having the same, not the same experience in the same exact way, but they're all both having a satisfactory experience, right? Give you a different example, Fernando, is I'm dyslexic. And so people who are not dyslexic, and a lot of people are dyslexic, but a lot of people are not, entering in a password is so frustrating to me. My brain doesn't connect well with it. I have a friend of mine who's a brilliant author and written multiple books, very successful. He has cerebral palsy. And so if you email with them, really easy to understand, you're talking to him, there's some challenges there. But we went through that period of time where people wanted to outlaw straws. He wrote an article. He goes, that's the only way I can drink, guys. I can't drink without a straw. Hello. And so, again, I keep coming back to it's I want to go to retail places, and I like to have cash experiences. I like to go in and buy things with cash and just have an exchange with the human where another person doesn't want to talk to human. I think they're wrong, by the way, for their mental health. But you have to be that flexible. So I think that great retailers need to be welcoming, but they also have to be understanding the diversity of who they're dealing with and that connective point and what people value. And within all that, I always come back to it's if you're a retailer, you got to know who your consumer is and they need to know who you are. And I think about grocery stores that have failed in our state. And I remember Sweet Bay or Cash and Carry. There was different grocers I'd look at. I'm like, I don't know who your customer is. I don't know who you are, right? And if I say Walmart, I say Target, I say Chick-fil-A, there's certain things I can say. You go, oh, I know who that is. And I know who their customer is. I know what that experience is going to be. But if you're a retailer that I say it and you're like, what? I don't know what that is. That's a problem, right? You got to connect into your own community. That makes sense?
Absolutely. It does.
I want to tell you one other story just because this is related, but it's recent. My wife and I have been married in March will be 30 years. And so for 20 plus years, she's a stay-at-home mom and raised our kids. And then my wife developed some very serious health issues. And it's been a very hard, scary journey. And we're still in the journey, right? Trying to figure out what's next. And when the kids went back to college or, she was sort of trying to figure out what's next. And, what do? You're at home and all that. You know what my wife did? My wife got a job at Publix as a cashier. And it has been one of the most awesome things to watch because here's a woman that she could be doing anything with her time, but what she's chosen to do to work, and she's chosen to be a cashier, and it has got her out of her head. The days she's worked, she's in the best mood. She's interacting with people. It's connecting her with people. She tells me all kind of crazy stories. She's learning new skills. And so I've said all things I've said and said and believed everything I've believed, all that was point. But now she's, this month she's year 2. She's worked 2,000 hours at Publix. The year before that, she volunteered at a hospital and put 100 hours in there. It was kind of a lean up. But I just confessed that to you that like after all that, it's like my household is living it and seeing that value, that connection. It's really helpful. And she has said to me, she goes, John, you'd be surprised sometimes somebody comes through the line and they keep talking to me and the next person's coming. And I'm trying to balance that. But she's like, they're lonely, right? I'm trying to be mean. If you let MBA grads run Publix or some other grocer, they could ruin it. If they start becoming so technology, we don't have anybody talking to anybody, it'll destroy it. But, on the other hand, you don't want to not have the technology, right? So it's about choice and flexibility.
And to your point, it's about combining the two. There's an interesting book that I just heard on the Weekly Take podcast, and the author is Jean Twenge. I think I'm pronouncing that right. She's a PhD professor at San Diego, and she wrote Generations, the Real Difference Between Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and Baby Boomers. And a lot of what you're saying about depression and needing the human contact and everything else was highlighted in that book generationally, and it was super interesting. A lot of what you're saying, because you've told stories about your mom, about yourself, about your kids, right? Just think how different each one of those three in your own family interact based on what generation they're from and what they need and are looking for.
I have a photo my mom sent me the other day, and it's my mom. And she's very young, and my oldest sister is a baby, and so my mom is probably 20 in that photo, and it's a cute picture. And she's with her aunt and with my mom's grandmother, and my mom's mom died when she was young, so my great grandmother helped raise my mom. So my great mother is sitting there, and they're all there together. My great grandmother was born the same year of Custer's Last Stand.
Yeah.
Wow.
Both my grandparents, my paternal grandparents were born in the 1800s. My grandfather fought in World War I. You think about that, that's 110 years ago, right? So that's sort of fascinating, that connectivity to all that. Now, real quick, I want to say this. I gave a speech recently, and they introduced me, and I went up to the podium, and I got to the podium, and this makes me crazy as a speaker, but there was all tables, and there's this table here, but there's a table here, and this table, like some others, their seats were facing each other. They just finished a meal. So as a speaker, you're like, gosh, that's really uncomfortable for them. So I just said, hey, before I get started, if you want, turn your chair around, because I'm speaking for 45 minutes and you relax. So this table right to my right, I'm looking at, is a bunch of young bucks. It's a bunch of young broker guys or whatever, and they're in conversation. So I'm speaking and they're doing that. And I said, hey, turn around. They don't turn around, and they're doing their thing. So as a speaker, you just roll, start doing it. So early in the speech, because I was doing a lot about community and mental health, a lot of things we're talking about, I told a story about my wife and, my mom and, different things I'm dealing with. I just became very vulnerable very quickly, and that's who I am, how I do things. I kid you not, the guys, they did this. They were like this. They were, that whole table completely got engaged. And honest to goodness, I had 2 jokes I had in my message I deleted, because I could tell they were so emotionally connected to me. And I told one story, and one of the guys went, yeah. And so So here are these young bucks. They were being a little rude, like, right? And they kind of acting their age on the one hand. On the other hand, I think they're more emotionally connected. They want to be emotionally connected, and they admit to it. Here's a real weird retail factoid kind of thing we could dive into. With my wife and our kids, we did a little trip to Savannah over the summer, and we went to the Prohibition Museum. Why would you have a Prohibition Museum in Savannah? I don't know. They talk a lot about Chicago. It's just kind of a fun, silly thing. But let's just think about that for a second. Around 110 years ago, the U.S. government outlawed alcohol. Think about it. Just pause on that. Like, think about living your life. Everything you do, there's no alcohol. What the hell? How did that how in the world did that happen, right? How did that happen? Here's John's theory. World War I. All these men came home from World War I. It was the first war with modernized weapons, and machine guns had existed, tanks had existed, mustard gas had existed. They saw all that, a meat grinder of horror, right? They came home, they had parades, and these fine young men would then go to work, go to a bar, get drunk, and not take care of their families. And it was so pervasive, they thought that alcohol was the problem. It wasn't the problem. It was loneliness. It was not being seen. It was not being heard. It was a failure to connect feelings. So when people are talking about this generation of young men, and guys, it's the same problems. It's the same exact thing. Let's not make the mistake that our forefathers did 110 years ago and focus on this component. And again, you'd be like, well, John, are you saying guns or not guns? Like, guys, I'm telling you, you can talk about all those things, and that's not to say we shouldn't restrict and have boundaries in our society. We should, but you've got to get to the root issue. In churches and retail and real estate organizations, we can help with all that if we start leaning into it.
I love that story because to me, what I heard was that these young guys were going to go listen to somebody telling them something they've heard before, right? Some guy's going to get up there and it might have been a retail conference or whatever kind of conference. They think they've heard it all before. And then all of a sudden, when you're telling your story, it's your story. So of course they haven't heard that before. So focus. So I think that's a huge kudos to you for being vulnerable. I mean, I've heard that throughout your stories and in the service that you do. A lot of the service that you do is the kind of service nobody wants to do because it's uncomfortable. Or seriously, I mean, or it's depressing. I do a lot of work with elderly, right? Because a lot of people don't want to deal with the elderly, right? They're opinionated, they complain, they're needy, whatever label they want to put on it. But you've talked about forgotten veterans. You've talked about people who don't have opportunities that, let's say, middle America has. You've talked about the elderly. I mean, your vulnerability helps the most vulnerable, which to me is, out of all your knowledge and everything you do, to me, that is your superpower, because there are very few people who will go and do what you are obviously going and doing and then sharing that experience with the rest of us. So kudos to you.
I appreciate that. I think one of the things when you talk about why, I think it's really important to define what success is to each of us, right? And again, I'm a devout capitalist, like grow your business. I love talking to people about growing businesses. I want everybody to just have great businesses, and I can be a fan, and even just cheering for you. I get pleasure out of like, go, that's so exciting, At the same time, that in and of itself is not going to fulfill you. It won't. And oh my gosh, I have so many terrible stories about guys that got it all and they were not happy. But at the same time, how people say no one on their deathbed wishes they had spent a day more at the office or whatever. Well, they're wrong. There are a lot of people on their deathbeds that wish they worked more because they didn't take care of their kids and they couldn't take care of their grandkids, or they didn't have enough money in retirement to do the things. So again, I don't like cliches. I don't like whatever. It's like trying to get to the meat of the conversation. So for me, I want to run successful businesses and I want to make impact. So success for me is impact, right? And I also like to share. It's like, look, like my podcast, I tell young real estate professionals, listen to every episode of my podcast and then connect to my guest on LinkedIn. Use my podcast for your cold calling. Build your business with that. It's free. Just use it, right? So what can we do with the collective? With my scholarships, of course, I love when people donate my scholarships. What I'd rather they do is endow their own. I'd rather they be competitive, beat me, but create a bigger scholarship than mine, right? That's what I want. And so to me, it's like, again, you got to define your level of success and the deeper why, and then finding, your tribe and your community to work together. And to me, it's like we work in a cool industry that's very friendly to each other. Like we can all do deals together, right? Like not every industry is like that. We are. And so finding every opportunity to help each other, let's do that. Robin Webb, great CSAM, passed away. And and I was at his funeral. First off, this was so cool. They gave away his ties. And so I have one and I wore it the next day. So I have a Robin Webb tie. It was super fun. But what's funny was the really great service, but the pastor leading, he said, raise your hand if you're CSAM. And I am not kidding you. 90% of the people in the room raised their hand. There must have been 100 CSAMs in that audience. And I was like, man, good for Robin. He gave his life to the CSAM industry and what he was doing. And they showed up. They were there and they loved him. And I was like, well done, Robin. He was the guy that shook my hand and told me I passed my CSAM exam in 1997.
Wow, that's amazing.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and I thought he was old then. He was not old then. But to me, it's like, that's really cool. But that goes back to our industry as one, you know what I mean? Like you see, we're competitors. I don't know, dude. Like, and I hire brokers and stuff all the time. I'm trying to help people. I got a young broker brought me a deal. I'm selling a property, and the kid screwed up on some stuff. And so I just called him. I said, "Can we talk?" And I said, "Can I coach you on some stuff?" And it's just sort of like walking him through. I'm like, "Look, we may or may not doing this deal together, but I'm a fan. I want to see you do well, right?" And he took that great.
That's awesome.
Let's be those people.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us. I know afterwards, Fernando and I are going to be like, wow, love your stories. I feel like I was sitting in your living room with a cup of coffee, just going through history. And so thank you so much for sharing your compassion, your insights, and your experience with Fernando and myself and all of our listeners.
I love it. I also love that you brought the memory of Robin Webb, which we love and respect so much. And, he was in this podcast. And I mean, to this day, we always tell our agents or anybody who wants to know anything about the hospitality industry, I say, you got to listen to this podcast. You got to follow anything that he ever wrote or ever spoke is gospel when it comes to hospitality for sure. But more than that, he was a hell of a human being, and he really knew how to connect with people.
And you know how we honor Robin is by being like Robin, right? Many times when I started my new company, he was one of the people I called and just got advice from. And so when somebody wants advice from me, I need to take that call. Like if you receive from Robin, you honor Robin by giving to the next get it done. So thank you guys for having me. Super fun. I hope this is helpful. I'm a fan of you guys. I'm a fan of the industry. If I can be a resource, you let me know. Okay.
Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you again at one of the next conferences.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and listening in. We really appreciate your comments, your feedback, and you pulling up a chair and joining us, as always, for Jennifer and I, and for Mr. John Crossman. Thank you for listening in. Until next time, bye-bye.